Hello, everybody. It's Sunday, and you know what that means. I'm Jon Weigell, and this is the weekend edition of the Hustle Daily Show. Silicon Valley is beginning to look beyond its San Francisco hubs. The California Forever project, backed by multiple billionaires and people of note like LinkedIn co-founder Reid Hoffman and founder of the Emerson Collective, Laurene Powell Jobs, is trying to build a brand new city from the ground up on the ranch land of Solano County, California. As you can imagine, there's a ton of controversy around this, with lawsuits flying left and right and friction between landowners and Jan Sramek, California Forever's founder. So today, we're joined by New York Times reporter Conor Dougherty to learn exactly what is behind the California Forever project. What is there to gain for the billionaires, and what is there to lose for current ranch owners of Solano County, and the many shady practices that are at play here. So let's get into it. Welcome, Conor. Great to have you on the show. This is a very expansive story that you've worked on for some time. But first, just to tackle it at the very beginning. So Jan Sramek, who I mentioned up top, the head of California Forever, can we talk about what his deal is? Where did he come from? How did he get involved in this whole thing?
Well, thank you for having me. Let me start by saying that. Jan is originally from the Czech Republic. He wrote a sort of a memoirish type book called Racing Towards Excellence. And in this book, he describes being kind of a wheeler dealer at a young age. He has this whole anecdote about how he lived in this very small town and essentially brokered a deal between the internet provider and the local government to bring broadband to the town, and describes how he got a cut of the deal for brokering this deal. And he's a teenager when this occurs.
Wow.
And, the book is a lot of sort of glorifying anecdotes about how good he is at handball and how many math competitions he won and stuff like that. But he, went to the London School of Economics and other types of things. Mm-hmm. He was in finance for a while, quit Goldman Sachs to get into startups, somehow ends up in the Bay Area, did a couple of startups. Neither of them seem to have done very well. And then, according to interviews I've had with him, was at one point thinking about trying to get into development in the city of San Francisco. So building condos or something like that. And he had some ideas about how he could do it more rapidly on a larger scale than had been done, but very quickly sort of realized, actually, I can't.
Sure.
So he, according to his story, starts going out to the eastern part of Solano County, which for your listeners is kind of north and east of San Francisco. It's about, 90 minutes, give or take. And it's this really open area, yellow fields, windmills everywhere, these 2-lane country roads that are named after farmers whose families have been there since 1870 something. The town there, called Rio Vista, has American flags lining the downtown, just not a place, both in terms of its politics and how it looks, that you associate with the Bay Area. Mm-hmm. Very rural feeling and sort of conservative feeling. He starts fishing out there and apparently at some point got a flash of inspiration. Why couldn't you just build a city out here? Started doing a bunch of research, apparently determined that the land was relatively affordable. I think when they started purchasing, it was in the neighborhood of $1,500 per acre. And just to give you a sense of things, if you wanted to buy almond groves or a vineyard, that would be tens of thousands of dollars, potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Okay.
But the point is that that's a low amount of money relative to most of the agricultural land we think of in California.
Definitely.
So he apparently starts shopping this idea to rich people, and they obviously gave him money, because then quietly, starting in about 2017, he begins buying acreage in this rural region of eastern Solano County and uses this company, which is called Flannery Associates, which was named for a road out there, to buy up tons of land. Mm-hmm. Not only is that an area where everyone knows each other because they all come from these kind of old line farming families, and not only is the land relatively inexpensive, it's not a place where land changes hands a lot.
Right. It read as very familial, inheritance-wise.
Yes, and when it does, everyone knows who it is or what they're doing or whatever.
Gotcha.
So for a company that nobody has heard of, nobody has any idea what they do, that is just all of a sudden buying 10,000 acres a year, tons of land out there.
Right.
Again, this is a place where like maybe 500 acres is like a normal amount. And that's usually because like someone died and, sold it to the neighbor or something like that. Nothing like that has ever happened out there. So they start buying all this land. Obviously, people have a lot of questions.
Sure.
But nobody can figure out who they are. And, over many years from 2017 to 2023, they acquire, I think, about 60,000 acres, which is about twice the area of San Francisco. But when you get to about early 2023, at this point, it is like a complete frenzy in that county. Local Congress people are starting federal investigations into this. All the land is around an Air Force base out there. So the Air Force base is freaking out. That was pretty much the story at the time that I found it.
Right.
And then one day I got a message, and the message said something to the effect of, have you read about this thing out there in Solano County? To which I responded, yes, I have read about this. What is up with this? And this person said, I'm pretty sure it is this. Mm-hmm. And they were able to tell me that there had been discussion in certain circles about something like this happening. And they recalled gossip about a couple tech guys attempting to do something that sounds quite a lot like this. I can't prove that this is that, but if I were you, I would try and put two and two together.
Uh-huh.
So I spent quite a bit of effort trying to get that tip to a level of certainty that I knew I was 100% correct. And with my colleague, Aaron Griffith, who was the other byline on the story, we were able to do that. But it wasn't a ton of time, but it was a lot of work, I should say.
Yeah, it must have been.
So we published our story. I distinctly remember this. We published our story and, I tweeted it, and I'm sitting there like coming down from the rush of it and whatever. And then somehow later that day, I went and looked at Jan's LinkedIn, which I had been stalking, obviously. And it had changed to CEO of California Forever.
Okay. I really want to kind of hammer in on the actual plan of California Forever, because as you've uncovered all this land that they're buying up, it's in East Solano County, and there's been a lot of friction between them, it sounds like, and the people who own that land or are selling them that land, or are in some cases being quite forced to sell them that land. But before we get there, I do want to know and pick your brain about it. What is the actual goal here? Is it just to build a well-operated, well-functioning, walkable, bikeable type city that's not San Francisco, that's semi-affordable, or is it very much beyond that in your perspective?
So I sometimes think of this as being both complicated and not complicated. It's complicated in the sense that I don't actually know the details of everything they've planned or want to do. I, of course, have tried to learn a few things. I have learned several things, but I could imagine that there are going to be all sorts of surprises, that might give some particular insights to their business model and or how they want to do this differently than other people have done it, that sort of thing. On the other hand, going to the middle of nowhere and trying to build a new community with all, respect to the people who live in that middle of nowhere is kind of the oldest game in town, right? Of
course,
all of California is built on these massive suburbs. At the time in which those suburbs were built, the idea of a car-centric suburban area where everyone owned a single family home, that wasn't brand new, but it was a relatively new concept that certainly had never been industrialized to the level it was after World War II. So my point is that going and buying a bunch of land, trying to make that land more valuable by building better infrastructure out there, putting stores and homes and all those things. That's what real estate is.
Sure.
And if this was Toll Brothers attempting to do this, and the pictures that they had were winding roads with cul-de-sacs, mm-hmm. I suspect many of us would have written articles about it, but I don't think you would be calling me. Certainly the phrase tech billionaires would not be in every headline, right? So the only things that are super different about this is the fact that they are saying they want to do this in a walkable, dense kind of way.
Yeah.
Even that's not that new. There are plenty of places in Phoenix that have that kind of town center design and whatever. And then, of course, the identity of who's behind it.
Mm-hmm.
You could argue that that's a plus or a minus for it. It's funny. I sometimes think one of their problems is they're incapable of being like, look, this is just like another crappy sprawl suburb, but it's going to be better than that. You know what I mean? Like, hey, it's that thing, but this is just like a slightly better version of it.
But better. Right.
You know, the idea that you could live in a place where it's not like anti-car or anything, but you know, your daily life could be conducted a little bit more easily with a little less car. I think lots of people would like that.
For sure.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the real estate prices in cities and other places that have that kind of design certainly reflect that there's a strong preference for that.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that idea that they're pushing is the thing that's sort of newish, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we think of it as the game of real estate, it's like go to the middle of nowhere where land isn't worth that much, figure out a way to make it be worth a lot more, and you'll make a lot of money.
I'm so curious as to your time with the residents of East Solano County, because of course there is some opposition to this, but is there any kind of movement to halt or slow down California Forever by people in these counties? And why do you think they would want to slow it down? Because there seems to be some friction, as I mentioned before.
There's a lot of people who do not want this, period.
Yes.
Lots of people.
And of course, like people are being paid out, farms are being bought. But why do they really, really not want this to enter the community? Is it going to be just destructive?
So let's go to the backstory for a second. The political story, and then let's call it the policy story. First off, I should say a lot of people sold their land very willingly, right? Not only were they delighted with the completely absurd prices California Forever was paying, i.e. they were paying high prices. Let's say you have 10,000 acres out there. And that's, you know, on paper worth millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
Before they came along, there was not some person who was just gonna buy that. And so the idea that someone was just gonna come along and, you know, give you $15 million or something for that land, that just was not gonna happen.
Right.
So all of a sudden, many of these families have a chance to liquidate it in one foul swoop for very high prices. They're making people millionaires all around the county. That's why everyone was freaking out. It was so obvious that they weren't farming.
Right. The land wasn't going to be used by another farmer coming in. Right.
Yes. And this brings us to the politics story. So at the time that all this is happening, their lawyer is sending people notes and assuring the county, these are just a group of wealthy individuals who like to diversify their assets and whatever. People certainly interpreted that as they are trying to assure us that they want to continue this land in the manner that it is. They're just diversifying assets. They're passive investors, whatever. And, you know, then people subsequently find out, no, that's not what they have planned.
Mm-hmm.
I've done some public records requests of county emails from that time. And you can just see them talking to each other, but they're saying, there's no way these people are doing farming. It's just not possible.
Mm-hmm.
So
mm-hmm.
then they begin to get a little hostile with people. For starters, there is a couple situations where there's like a family farm. Obviously, this family farm is distributed through like multiple generations of people now. And they would go find one person or a couple people or whoever and be like, hey, you know, could I buy your shares in this company, basically? And then all of a sudden, Flannery Associates is like partners with this like family. So then they started suing those families from within. In fact, it was funny. At one point, I was trying to like track this in a lawsuit, and it was melting my brain because so like in one part of the lawsuit, that entity is like anti-Flannery, and then later that entity is Flannery. Like you could just see them like in there, like buying different names and whatever, you know. I think Jan would tell you, well, you know, we gave those cousins or whoever they were like a chance to sell out. The family would say it's basically like a hostile takeover of our family business. And certainly the farmers around that area would interpret it the way that the farmers did. Now, the bigger thing is from that lawsuit, they got a bunch of emails.
Right.
They used those emails from those earlier lawsuits to file this massive antitrust suit against all the other farmers. And what they say is basically, oh, we have all these emails of you saying, you know, that you really do want to sell, but you're just kind of holding out. Now, I should say that is an allegation.
Of course.
That is in no way decided. But the point is, that's what Flannery is alleging. And of course, the farmers, many of whom have settled, but there are a few who haven't. And they, of course, allege, no, that's not the case. bottom line is this. Between these tactics, suing these families from within, using that to then dredge up a bunch of stuff, what they then use to construct this other lawsuit, that has obviously not endeared them to the surrounding community. And they find these tactics to be, let's just say, not neighborly.
Sure.
All this is happening when I break this story. So all of these people are being sued by this ghost, basically. I mean, some of these farmers have been in these very intense lawsuits with Flannery, their lawyers, whatever, for months at that point.
Wow.
And they're being sued for, I think, like $300 million or something. I don't know what it was. It was hundreds of millions of dollars. I forget exactly what the number was. But recall that they are being sued with all this paper and whatever. They have no idea who Flannery even is when this is happening. They just know this random company that obviously has a lot of money. So when I break the story, they, of course, then realize they're essentially being sued by some of the richest people, like Laurene Powell Jobs, Mark Andreessen, all these people. Now, of course, those people would probably tell you we're just passive investors in the whole thing, but it's their money doing all this.
Exactly. Uh-huh.
There's no lawsuit without their cash. So, that's led to a lot of anger, obviously.
Yeah, I can understand.
So here we are. The second I break the story, me and Aaron break the story, they just go full public. There's a website, there's renderings, they're doing town hall meetings. They are in a full campaign. They need voters to approve this project. Solano County has a rule that basically says, we don't want anybody to build in the rural parts of the county. It's an anti-sprawl ordinance in effect. So they essentially need voters to say, we would like to override that long-standing ordinance so that we can build in this unincorporated part of the county.
Sure. Is there a time for this vote to happen?
Oh, November.
November, this coming election season.
People may be distracted by another election on that day.
Potentially. I don't know what you're referring to, but...
But it will be on that same day as our presidential election.
Okay. Wow. So a lot to think about for the people out there.
I don't know. I got a lot of choices here.
Yeah.
So anyway, the point is, that's where we are.
Okay. And say it is a no. Say the people vote and they choose not to have it. They don't want it there, and the population shows that.
Yeah.
What exactly is California Forever left with?
Well,
do they have like any loopholes to get through there, or what are they going to do?
Probably the question, right? So for starters, they still own like all of the land out there. There's a couple of holdouts, some of them pretty significant, but in general, they are by far the largest landowner. Well, they're the largest landowner in the county, period, and they own essentially everything out there with some little checkerboards notwithstanding, right? So they're there now, and they're going to do something.
Right.
And I've told some of the farmers I've talked to have said, like, I'm kind of stuck with them. Like, they're my neighbor now. So, I mean, there's a bunch of things that you do. One, they could try to put solar farms or, there are already windmills on that land. There's all sorts of things you could try to put on that land that aren't farming that could potentially be more lucrative. Mm-hmm. They own several hundred acres inside of the city of Rio Vista, which is a small city, but it's the little city. That's where the people there get their groceries or whatever. They could build within that. That's technically not afoul of the anti-sprawl ordinance. That would be a much smaller project, but it would be like a start to something.
Okay.
They've said that they would consider doing that. I think some people would interpret that as potentially a threat. Certainly some people have said that. Mm-hmm. And they can obviously go back to the ballot and then go in 2 years. Sure. They can go in 4 years. They can keep trying to do this.
So they have options.
Mm-hmm.
Another question I had about this farmland. If they're buying all of this farmland that's been in families for generations, is this doing anything to the farming industry? Like, is that land was it actively being farmed on? And is them moving in there stopping certain things from being farmed in that area?
So many of the farmers out there own their land. They own a bunch of land, they farm sheep on it, whatever. So one of the things is that many of the families out there essentially no longer farm. The last person to farm is like 90 years old. The kids aren't interested in it anymore, whatever. There's a lot of that as there is in much of rural America.
Yeah.
And what they do is they lease out the land to other people. And their quote unquote farm, their farming business, as it were, is essentially like not viable. without those thousands of acres to farm, right?
Right.
Flannery now owns many of those leases. And they have, in at least one instance, canceled a bunch of leases for a farmer who talked out about them.
Yes.
Basically said, I don't like this company. On top of that, they told him in this letter, we're canceling your leases because you don't like us, basically.
Was that Ian Anderson in your story?
Yes, exactly. And it's funny. I remember when I read that letter, I was like, what's the point of even saying this? And again, without inserting myself on this, that was obviously not interpreted super generously by his farming neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one huge caveat that I need to add in all of this. We, in this conversation, we're really focused on this area, Rio Vista. We're really focused on the area where they have bought the property and where the farmers are and where the lawsuits have been and blah, 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 right? So the quote unquote election is not in Rio Vista. Rio Vista, every single one of those 10,000 people could be like, hell no. And they could still win by a landslide.
Okay.
If they could convince the people of Vallejo who were 50 something miles away. My point is that the election, if they're successful, it will be because they made a great pitch about jobs, about this being good for the county, for this being an economic engine. It's the people of Vallejo and Vacaville and Fairfield. That is who's deciding this.
Not the people in Rio Vista.
Yes.
Not the farmers themselves. Because they're a very low amount of the population when you look at it. That's right.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
In the end, this comes down to, do you trust these people and do you have faith in them?
Mm-hmm.
Because no matter how many assurances they make legally, because they have put some things in the initiative that if the initiative were to pass, they would become binding in some way. There's still so much unknown.
Mm-hmm. I'm looking forward to the coverage to come. Are you going to be keeping your ear to the ground over there?
I'm going to keep following it. But like I said, it's both complicated and not. There are going to be a million headlines. But, if you're trying to think about it, it's pretty logical. They can either do the thing they want to do,
mm-hmm.
or they're going to try to figure something else to do with that land.
Yeah.
And that something else can kind of be energy, infrastructure. It can't be housing.
Sure.
If they don't get permission. So my point is that each of these things will be presented as a revelation when and how. Oh, they actually have a solar power plant. Oh, they actually have whatever. But we know somewhere in the bowels of their business plan, this all exists.
Yes.
I just basically don't believe that these people who are quite wealthy bought all this land with no plan other than this one highly risky plan.
There's a B and a C and a D plan, I'm sure.
Yes, exactly. And those all have to involve something that sort of isn't people intensive.
Well, Conor, really appreciate your time today. Thank you for giving me all these bits of information and going through all the layers with everybody. And good luck with the coverage.
Yeah, well, we'll see.
And I hope it goes well. And I'll hope to chat again soon.
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much, Conor. And thank you all for listening to the Hustle Daily Show today. We're a proud part of the HubSpot Podcast Network. Our editor today is Robert Hartwig, and our executive producer is Darren Clark. We've got a ton more tech and business coverage in our newsletter. If you're not subscribed, go get signed up at thehustle.co/email, and we'll see you tomorrow.